Welcome everyone to the first session of the 2025 Forum, a cooking demonstration with Anna Olson. I'm Carrie Thibodeau, the National Director of Programs and Public Policy at the Kidney Foundation of Canada. Please remember that the information shared in this session isn't intended to be medical advice. As always, we do recommend that you speak to your doctor about your own individual situation. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to our moderator and to our presenter. Our moderator today is registered dietitian June Martin. June has been a nephrology dietitian for over 25 years at Grand River Hospital in Kitchener. Currently, she works in home hemodialysis, MCKC, and in-center dialysis. She's the past president of the Canadian Association of Nephrology Dietitians and was one of the original authors of the Spice It Up series of cookbooks. June is a longtime volunteer at the Kidney Foundation, and she currently co-chairs our National Programs and Public Policy Committee. Joining us as well today is Anna Olson. Anna is Canada's baking sweetheart, but she's also an accomplished savory chef. She's become one of the country's most recognizable television chefs with her positive and common sense approach in the kitchen. Appearing for 2 decades on the Food Network Canada, which with shows like Bake with Anna Olson, and now on series like Great Chocolate Showdown, her audience has expanded globally through broadcast television. Anna's Oh Yum YouTube channel, which now has over 1.5 million subscribers, features her classic content, live streams, and fresh series. And her large social media audience is engaged and interested in her cooking, baking, and travel experiences. Anna's an expert in writing recipes with a practical approach, and her trusted work appears in magazines and in her 12 best-selling cookbooks. Her most recent book, Baking Wisdom, earned a gold medal at the Taste Canada Cookbook Awards, and it made the IACP shortlist. Anna studied and worked in the US before settling in the Niagara region, where she worked as a pastry chef at the award-winning Inn on the 20, and also owned and operated 2 bakeries for over a decade. I'll hand it over to you now, June.
Okay, thank you so much. So Anna and I together will answer any questions that come in the Q&A. So just remember that we're not giving out personal medical advice. So thank you, Carrie, for that introduction. Welcome everybody to the cooking demonstration, and I cannot wait to see how Anna creates her famous recipe. Ready to go?
All right. Thank you very much, June, and hello to everyone. I'm so glad you could join us here today. I'm so thrilled to be here. Normally, I'm making sweets, and it's a pleasure for me to share with people that, well, the truth is I don't eat cookies for breakfast, and I try very hard to eat a balanced diet. My husband, who's actually running the cameras, is a chef as well, so we collaborate all the time, we inspire each other, and I'm here to do just that, inspire you with a kidney-friendly recipe that is easy to prepare. And this is actually a soup recipe that we featured on the menu at Inn on the 20 when Michael was chef and I was pastry chef, and it stayed on the menu for a decade. It was such a staple, and it really is easy to make. And I've made some adjustments so that it's renal friendly, and I'd love, June, for you to jump in when those ingredients appear to talk about it. And then as our soup is cooking, I'll talk a little bit about seasoning without salt, because seasoning with salt can so easily just be a habit. And when you want to change or break that habit, you need to know what to replace it with. And this is what I'm here to help with today. So I'm going to kick things off right away. I've got my burner with a pot that I'm just going to heat up a little bit. And I'll start with base flavors. So when you're trying to make something taste good, anything, there's usually a foundation. In French cuisine, it's called a mirepoix, and that's that combination of onion, celery, and typically carrot. Because we're making a pepper soup, I'm relying on the onion and celery, but taking the carrot out because I don't want that to interfere with the color and flavor of the pepper. You don't need a lot of oil in the pan. So just a teaspoon or 2, because this I'm cooking the onions and celery on a medium heat, so not a high heat. We don't want to brown the vegetables. The term is actually called sweating. So we're drawing out the water, the excess water from the vegetables, but what that does, the water evaporates, and then you're left with soft, tender vegetables with a slightly more concentrated flavor. So I'll play with my heat here, and this usually just takes a couple of minutes. It's a good idea to sweat out your vegetables as opposed to just bringing a pot of liquid up to a boil and dumping everything in, because things cook at a different rate. Different vegetables cook at a different rate. And it is about softening those cells within the vegetables so that the flavor, it has the most potential to draw out the flavor into the liquid. So when you combine everything together, it has a nice homogeneous flavor. And it's about layering the flavor. As you're going to see, as I keep adding ingredients, we're layering in the flavor.
Anna, we have a question about how much onion and how much celery you've added there.
Oh, yes, very good. And I should say this recipe is available on the Kidney Foundation of Canada website, so you have full access to it. You can print it out. It's just good old cooking onions. I'm also trying to be aware that it's the last week of February. Produce pickings are slim, but we can also celebrate Canadian hothouse ingredients. So cooking in onions would be a Canadian product that they were picked in the fall, stored over the winter. Celery, well, that's not growing locally these days, but I've got 2 cooking onions and 1 stalk of celery. And immediately it starts smelling good in here. We joke in our house, if the general rule in our house with 2 chefs is that whoever gets home first starts cooking dinner. So if I have a busy day on the road, I do a lot of back and forth to Toronto. Michael will be the one who will have dinner when I walk in after traffic. Or if Michael was teaching, because he teaches at Niagara College, I'll start dinner, but sometimes I may not know what I'm making 5 minutes before I know Michael's going to walk in the door. And our trick is either of us will dice up an onion and get it sauteing because it makes the house smell good. Meanwhile, my head's in the fridge and I'm trying to figure out what to make. All right, this is starting to soften up a little bit. So now for the key ingredient. This is the essence of the soup. So I've got 3 red bell peppers. So these are sweet bell peppers. I've taken out the seeds and that white sort of pithy bit on the inside because it's spongy and it offers nothing in terms of flavor. Just rough diced it. The soup is being pureed, so it really doesn't matter. The smaller you cut your vegetables, the faster they'll cook, but you can just rough chop your peppers if you want. And now is when we start seeing Canadian hothouse produce. So Canadian hothouse peppers, cucumbers, eggplants, tomatoes start in abundance. And it really gets me excited about spring because then you know what's around the corner, which is our local harvest. I get really excited about rhubarb because that's our first fruit of the season when really it's not a fruit, it's a weed. But it's the first thing to peek up out of the ground. So in go the peppers. And I don't know, June, do you want to speak to why red peppers are so good for a renal diet?
They are a very low potassium vegetable. And even if you don't need to follow a low potassium diet, bell peppers are a fantastic source of vitamin C and a source of fiber. So they're a great choice for everyone. Anna, we have a question of whether or not you could use orange peppers as well in this.
You know what? You certainly could use orange peppers. You could use yellow peppers. The color may not come through as vibrant if you were to use yellow, but you would have a beautiful soup if you were to use orange peppers. Because quite often now you buy them in a kit, right? It comes with 1 red, 1 orange, 1 yellow. You can mix up the red and orange. And do I recall correctly, I'd like you to verify it, June, because I'm not a registered dietitian, that orange peppers are also good for your eyesight. Are they not?
All orange vegetables have beta carotene, which is good for your eyesight. So you're right.
Excellent. All right. double duty here. Now I'm just looking to warm up the peppers at this time. I'm not looking to wilt them down. But now is a great time to add some of my flavor builders. Because we're not relying on salt at all in this recipe, we're building those background notes. So garlic is an easy one. So I've just sliced it up. You don't have to mince it or finely chop it because we are pureeing the soup. One of my favorite ingredients to cook with, especially this time of year when you've got soups and stews and chilies, roasts, anything that's slow cooked, fresh thyme is amazing. It's in one of those herbs, if you buy it in the cello pack, it keeps in the fridge for weeks. Even if you see it start to turn a little bit brown, it's still absolutely fine. I've chopped it here and I'll add that in just to start warming it up before I add the liquid. What I like about thyme is, unlike some other fresh herbs, it's a background flavor. You kind of taste it at the back of the palate. If you were to make just good old chicken stock, which it is actually the next ingredient I'm going to add. So a chicken stock is made with, I usually use chicken legs, buy them on sale, onion, carrot, celery, and I add just water and a little fresh thyme. If you didn't add the fresh thyme, strangely, the chicken stock would taste less like chicken. So thyme, you never eat something and go, oh, that's lovely thyme flavored soup or a stew, but without it, those key ingredients don't shine as brightly. So now that I've warmed it up and I can instantly smell that garlic and the fresh thyme, and I do recommend, if I may, I recommend buying the fresh thyme. That one little cello pack lasts a really long time in terms of usage. You get a lot. This recipe calls for 2 teaspoons of chopped thyme. That's like 2 stems chopped up. Dried thyme doesn't have quite that depth of flavor. If you are using dried thyme, though, cut the amount in half because obviously it's dehydrated. So once it liquefies, gets bigger when it cooks. So you would use 1 teaspoon. Now I'm adding my 1 liter of, this is homemade chicken stock. This time of year, every Saturday, I'll get a batch of chicken stock on the go because then I've got it as a resource. I keep it usually in a juice pitcher in a jug. You might have to label it because it looks like apple cider, but it's not. But then it's easier to make those quick batches of soup if you want when you have that around. And then I'm controlling it because when I make stock, even not for a renal diet, I never add salt because I never know what I'm using it for. And then you can control the flavor as you go along. Or if you're buying it, you want to make sure you're buying no salt chicken stock.
And I'll just add to that, make sure you're buying the no salt added chicken stock. Sometimes you can see low salt or sodium reduced, and what they've done is they've taken out sodium chloride and they've added potassium chloride. So if you are in a potassium restriction, that's not a great choice for you.
That's a very good tip.
We have a couple of questions.
Yes.
If you don't like celery, is there another option?
You could leave it out and add a little extra onion, just so celery is so mild, but I know what you mean. It can have that little background taste even once it's cooked. So because it's only 1 stalk, I would say you want to replace its structure in the recipe. So maybe another half an onion would do the trick because you are really slow cooking this soup out so the flavors do meld. And you said there was another question, June?
2 more. Jarred or regular garlic? What are your thoughts on that?
I prefer fresh garlic simply because I find sometimes the jarred garlic, or if it's packed in oil, can have a bit of a bitter aftertaste. So I like using fresh garlic, but if what you have is jarred garlic, by all means, go ahead. I would rather you use that over dried garlic, which has actually a completely different flavor. Yeah. Which, strangely enough, if I'm making my own ranch dressing or dip, I like dried garlic in that as opposed to fresh. I guess it's an association thing.
That makes sense. And what about using vegetable broths to make this vegan?
100%. Yes, that's a perfect question, June, because that was going to be my next point. You can either make your own vegetable stock. These days, trimmings from vegetables, anything sweet, sort of with a natural fresh sweetness, you can put in a vegetable stock. Cobs of corn, after you take the corn off the kernel, the kernels off the cob, is fantastic in a vegetable stock, but it's easier, or would you say, June, it's easier to find no salt vegetable stock than it is no salt chicken stock?
They're both pretty easy to find nowadays,
Okay.
like the President's Choice Blue Menu, and there's a few of the organic ones out there that are no salt added. But yeah, those are good options. And I've got some requests on here to ask if you would share your stock recipes, if that would be something that we would be able to coax from you for our patients.
Sure. Well, I can just, without even giving you a recipe, what I do is I typically buy, you can get the 3-pack of chicken legs with the thigh attached. For some reason, they come in a 3-pack, but I buy that. So it's really about 2 pounds of chicken. But as opposed to bones, I like buying the chicken thigh and leg attached because it's got so much meat. You can pull the skin off beforehand if you want, or if you're not comfortable touching it, you just put it right in the pot. Don't rinse your chicken, there's no need. And then for that, what I do is I cut 2 onions in half, 2 cooking onions. What I do is I peel that outer papery layer of the onion, but you know how onions have that sort of sub layer that's stuck to the onion and it's got a nice brown color? I leave that on because that actually lends a beautiful sort of orange color to the stock in addition to the carrots. So 2 cooking onions, 2 stalks of celery, or skip the celery if you don't like it, and 2 carrots. And then you just rough chop those big chunky pieces. In that goes with a couple pieces of, like 1 sprig of fresh thyme like this would be perfect in there, 2 or 3 peppercorns, and then you just fill the pot with water until the vegetables and the chicken are completely submerged. And then the key is to bring it up to a simmer slowly. So you don't crank it on high heat, because as you slow cook it, it's going to draw the impurities. You see those sort of brown foamy bits that float to the bottom of the stock? Those come up first, you skim those off, and then you just gently simmer it. And because you're using legs with meat on it, as opposed to bones, which would have to cook for 6 hours, 8 hours, within 90 minutes to 2 hours, you have a beautifully rich, delicious stock, and it's salt-free. Something else we do, if I can just add to that, I know we're getting off topic. I'll get back to the soup in a second because I have a very important ingredient to talk about. If we roast a chicken, if we're doing a roasted chicken on a weekend, what we do is break down the chicken. So you take off the breast meat, you take off the legs, you pull the meat you want, you eat, but then you take what's left of the roasted chicken, because it's got little bits of meat on it, kind of break it down, put that in a smaller pot, not a full-size stock pot, throw in an onion and a carrot, and cover it with water, and basically simmer that for 90 minutes. And you've given yourself a quick chicken stock, making use of something that was probably just going to go in your organics bin.
Awesome. And how long would that keep in your fridge?
I would keep it for up to 5 days. What you can do, because it's flavored water, is you can reduce it. If you strain it, then reduce it by half so it simply doesn't take up so much space in your freezer. You can freeze it in little containers, whether it's a 1 cup or 2 cup container, to pull out when you need it, which is very handy. It's not like a beef stock that you reduce down to almost nothing and make a glaze. But just remember, if you reduced it by half, you've just made concentrate to rehydrate it, because it will be rather intense.
Okay.
This is a good conversation. I like this.
Yes, there's lots of questions.
Yes, and now I'm bringing my soup up to a simmer. The last ingredient before I put the lid on is basmati rice. And this is raw, uncooked basmati rice, half a cup for this pot. So for a liter of liquid, the 3 peppers, 2 onions, stalk of celery, I've got half a cup of basmati rice. Now, usually when I make a pureed soup with a vegetable that doesn't have a lot of thickening body, so if you're, say, making a broccoli or cauliflower soup, similar, like a pepper, It would be thin if you just pureed the vegetables. So you want something to thicken it. Sometimes you can use a roux, but then you have to add extra fat to the recipe. A potato is a common trick, but if you're on a renal diet, you're avoiding potatoes. So adding the uncooked rice, as you're bringing your liquid up to the simmer, the rice is going to cook in there, release its starch into the liquid, and when we puree it, it makes it so velvety smooth, you would swear there was cream in it, but there is no cream in this recipe.
That's amazing. And we have a question here about potassium. And I just want to clarify that not everybody requires a potassium restriction. So if you haven't been told that you need to limit your potassium, then it doesn't apply to you. But we want to make sure that these recipes are good for everybody with kidney disease, regardless of whether they need a potassium restriction or not.
Great. Okay, now that my soup is just starting to come up to a simmer, I'm going to put on a lid and let it really come to a simmer. I'll have you take a look at it before I swap it out, because I have one. I did the magic of television move. I hope you don't mind. And I already made a pot, so we didn't have to wait so long. And I'm just going to make sure it comes up to a simmer before I puree it and give you the big reveal. I wanted to spend, if I could, a couple minutes. We have lots of time talking about seasoning without salt. So how to replace flavor. They're the obvious flavor builders. We were talking about garlic, but replacing that sensation to maximize, you're using great ingredients to maximize the flavor of them when you want to pull the salt out of it. So the first I'd like to talk about actually are those flavor builders when you're not adding, or when you're cooking something, slow cooking. So these are ingredients that would be added early on in the cooking process. If you're roasting vegetables, if you're stewing, braising, doing anything with liquid, this gets added at the beginning. So we've already covered my love of thyme as a great ingredient. I am a big fan of fresh herbs, and whether you buy them fresh or dried, bay leaf is another great flavor builder. Kind of like thyme, you add this to your chicken stock or a stew, it rounds out the flavor, but you never really know. Like, does anyone ever eat anything and go, ooh, I can really taste the bay in that? But it does round out those flavors. If you're a fan of chili pepper flakes, just a pinch, even if you don't want to add heat, to add that warmth from just a pinch in a soup or a stew, it keeps your mouth busy and makes you enjoy what you're eating and makes you go in for that second bite with enthusiasm. Citrus zest is a fantastic ingredient to lean on. And so the juice I'll be talking about in a second, but the flavor that comes from zest, even if you're not making something lemon flavored, it can really wake up other ingredients. And so all I do is take a vegetable peeler and peel a couple of strips from the lemon, and that could be an orange as well. I don't recommend grapefruit. Bit too bitter. Could be lime just as easily. So if you're steaming rice, if you're making even a chili, to add a couple of lemon, the zest from these 2 pieces of lemon just adds, it's about that combination of aroma and then back of the palate taste, because the oils are in the skin and there's no acidity. So you don't expect any juice or tartness from this. In fact, I'm going to throw this in my pepper soup here. I will pull them out before I puree. If you're looking for another ingredient that has flavor in that sort of well-rounded way, mild paprika. So you can use the smoked Spanish paprika if you want to add a smoky barbecue taste to it, but mild Hungarian paprika is the secret ingredient to so many spice blends because A, it's affordable, but it does build flavor. So if we're putting a roasted chicken in the oven, you just put some freshly ground pepper and a nice sprinkling of paprika on it, and as the chicken roasts, the skin crisps up and it lends beautiful aroma and flavor without adding any salt. So make sure you're not using the blends that have salt often worked in it, but just straight sweet Hungarian paprika. Another ingredient that's less common, but especially this time of year, if you're doing any sort of beef stew, or I'm putting it in my chicken stock these days because I want a big, flavorful chicken stock, juniper berries. They used to be hard to find, but I live in a smallish. I live in a city. We've got 60,000 people here in Welland. I can find juniper berries at my grocery store. And they look like large black peppercorns, and just 2 or 3 of these into your soup or stew. And it just, again, is that background. It almost lends a mushroomy flavor without being mushroomy, if that makes sense, which is why I like it more in a beef-based kind of dish. So that's a good lesson in sort of ingredients to add before or early on in the cooking process. Rosemary is another obvious one. I just didn't have any rosemary in my fridge to show you. But that rosemary has its own big flavor, where these tend to sort of mellow in the background.
That's great. So I have a question here about a no sodium salt, and I just want to let people know that there is no such thing as there is no sodium salt, but unfortunately those are potassium-based salts. So even if you don't need a potassium restriction, we don't recommend them because they're so high in potassium. And then the other question is, if you're on a low sodium diet, does that mean no salt at all? And how much should you aim for? So most people should aim for about 2,000 milligrams of sodium per day. So a lot of canned soups, unlike the one Anna is making, is going to bring well over 1,000 milligrams of sodium per serving. Keep in mind that a teaspoon of salt has about 2,300 milligrams of sodium. So eighth of a teaspoon would be around 300 milligrams. So you wouldn't want to add any more than that to something that you are having.
Wow. It's amazing to wrap your head around that volume. So a teaspoon of added salt, a teaspoon of salt in an entire day is what our recommendation is.
It's for you and I, yes, but if you have kidney disease, then a little bit less. So
even less. Wow. Wow. Well, I'm happy to be able to share some ideas for seasoning without salt. And it's a habit you have to break. And I become aware of it, having these conversations and working on these recipes, how easy it is to just lean on salt to season. So this has been an excellent exercise for me to think about seasoning things. And if I may, before I get to pureeing this soup, to talk about ways to add flavor towards the end of cooking. So say you've made this pepper soup, and I'm actually going to use this technique for this soup to season it, because I am not adding any sodium, any salt at all. Those fresh herbs. So I was talking about herbs like rosemary and thyme that have thick stems. So they're hardy, they benefit from cooking. Well, your herbs that have tender, delicate stems, like parsley, coriander, chives, fresh basil. I was so excited to see a basil plant in the grocery store that actually looked healthy. So I snapped it up. These are herbs that you add at the end of cooking. So it gives you control, where normally when you were used to cooking with salt, you might season lightly as you go along, and then you do that final taste, adjust the salt. Well, now you don't want to do that. You want to use these fresh herbs like this. And I think parsley is an underrated fresh herb. First off, it's so cheap. You can buy a giant bunch for $1.99. It lasts twice as long as the coriander in your fridge. And just chopping up, the stems are actually very, very sweet. Everyone uses the leaves, but the stems are tender, not the thick part at the very bottom, but that sort of mid to upper part. So I don't pick the leaves off and throw away the stems. I chop up the stems with the leaves, and there's a freshness to parsley and a familiarity, because part of what you're doing, I think, and this is This is not based on anything medical. It's just how our mind works. It's like when I deal with pulling gluten out of recipes, wheat-based products. There's a comfort and a familiarity with salt, so you need to replace it with something else that's equally familiar. And this is where I think parsley comes into play. Outside of the fact it adds lovely color to your dishes. So you can be generous with your parsley, fresh basil, fresh chives now, even green onions work wonderfully, and they brighten and sort of wake up your palate, so then you taste the rest of what you're eating. So it's there first, and then it goes away, and you're left with those flavors you added early on at the back of the palate. And then the other real trick I love you playing with is fresh lemon juice. That little bit of acidity replaces that sort of kick that salt would add, that again rounds out flavors, but you add it at the very end. So you can add it, sprinkle it yourself on your dish if you want, or stir it in at the very end. If you add it too early, it just cooks away and it disappears. So it's definitely a last minute addition. And now, admittedly, I made this batch of soup about an hour before we started cooking. So that rice really does, the rice really absorbed. Can you believe that's half a cup of rice in there? But it's absorbed all the liquid. And I should note, so the actual recipe itself, that rice will be fully cooked within 20 minutes. And the peppers will be nicely softened. The onions will be softened. So as soups go, this is very, very quick. This sat for a while, so the rice kept absorbing all the liquid that's in there. But now I can transfer it to my blender. I'll make a racket for a bit. And spoon. I'm using a blender. You can use an immersion blender. I was going to bring my immersion blender, but I've realized the motor's starting to go on it, and it does not sound healthy. I need a new immersion blender. So food processor, immersion blender, or a regular blender to puree the soup. And this is definitely a soup you can make and freeze. So you can make the full batch, which yields enough to feed 8 servings, but you could easily just pack it and freeze it as you wish.
So I've got a couple comments here. I've got somebody pointing out that Mrs. Dash doesn't have salt, and that is true, but we wouldn't actually call it a salt. So it's like a spice blend. Anna is creating her own spice blend here, but that is one that is low in salt. And then there's lemon pepper. Somebody commented about how good that is, and I agree. That's a great, easy, low sodium spice. And another question about extra low sodium soy sauce. I am not familiar with that product. So that would be just something you would only want to use in a very tiny amount.
Good to know. I'm just going to bring my blender over. Make sure it's plugged in. I don't want to run both units at the same time. Now, just a bit of advice. Especially with red pepper soup, all it takes is blending it once without holding your hand over the lid to know what happens. So when you're pureeing a hot liquid, you have to leave room for air to escape. If I were to turn this mixer on now and not hold the lid or have this is why this comes out. In addition for adding ingredients, it's because to release the pressure, if I were to spin this, I would have red pepper soup all over my ceiling, says the girl who has done that before. So I'm just leaving it cracked open, and then I put a kitchen towel over top. There we go. That's it for the racket. Bring my pot back. And then you've got this beautifully silky smooth soup that looks like it has cream added to it, not a bit of cream. And then my last addition is to add the lemon juice. And the acidity in lemon juice actually has the technical function of keeping red and light colored vegetables bright. So you won't lose that vibrancy. You know what? I'm going to start. That was a nice juicy lemon. So I'm going to stir that and give this a taste. When Michael teaches his students in culinary arts, the golden rule is always taste what you make before you serve it to people. Yeah, I don't need any more lemon juice than that. It just wakes up that pepper flavor. I'm going to set this aside, hold it warm, and then to make more of a meal of this. So that would be delicious on its own, or as a starter course, but to make more of a, I do soup for lunch all the time, but we want to add a little protein to it. I've got some cooked chicken. I just took chicken breasts and oven roasted it with just a little black pepper on the surface. I've got some fresh basil, chili flakes, and I will use more of that lemon. So just a tiny teaspoon. This is a half batch. So you could, any leftover chicken, or if you have leftover pork or any other protein that you could use tofu just as easily. And I'm just going to warm it up. I'll put a little black pepper and a pinch of the chili flake. That's optional. You know what? I was talking about paprika. I'm going to add a pinch of the paprika now. So it's getting added early, and I'll finish with the basil and with the lemon juice at the very end, just to warm it. So that way, again, layering flavor. This is seasoned as well as the soup is seasoned, so they'll both meet each other in the middle. Pardon me.
All right, so I have a question here about whether kidney patients can eat potatoes, and the answer to that is that it depends. If you have a high potassium, potatoes need to be prepared a certain way to make them low in sodium, so that would be double boiling them. And there's lots of information on the Kidney Community Kitchen website about that. But if you don't need to limit your potassium, then you can go ahead and enjoy your potatoes. Okay, so while Anna's doing that, I'll just, there's a comment here that somebody makes a red pepper and pear soup, which sounds very interesting. And when Anna comes back, we'll have her answer a question about if you can use rice like this to make to thicken other soups, to make a cream of mushroom or other kind of soup as well. And I love to see that we're adding some protein here that's make ahead. So there's a question about tips to make cooking easier throughout the week. So something like having a protein prepared in advance like this that you can just reheat by adding some flavors is a great tip for making your week go a little bit better.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. It's the season, right? Oh, I don't know anyone who's been spared a bit of a cold. I'm over the worst. A good bowl of soup will definitely do the trick. Okay, so now that I've just simply warmed up the chicken, I take it off the heat, and now I can add my basil and a little lemon juice and just spoon that right in.
And Anna, can you add any kind of rice to thicken a soup?
Sure. Oh yeah, it really doesn't matter. Arboreal rice would have more starch, so it might end up making a slightly thicker soup, in which case, but you can always adjust. If you cook the soup down, you can add a little more stock or even just water to get the consistency you want if you find it's a bit thick.
And then there's another question about using a different protein to make this vegan. And I think you already mentioned tofu, and this person has suggested chickpeas. So that would be another great protein as well. Chickpeas
would be fantastic. And to warm them up with the basil and the chili flake would be just absolutely super. Or any dried bean. Of course, I know that have the salt added to it, so you can cook from dry. Pressure cookers, Instapots are fantastic for that.
Now you can buy canned legumes canned without salt. So you could buy the canned chickpeas without salt, or white beans, or whatever kind of bean you would like, or legume you would like, and heat it like this.
And a great little free with purchase, when you're buying those no salt canned chickpeas, especially if you're cooking or baking vegan, drain the chickpeas, but save that liquid. We call that aquafaba. And so a lot of protein and starch has gone into that liquid, and you can treat those like egg whites. And if you're making a recipe that calls for whipped egg whites, you can whip up that chickpea liquid and it whips up like a meringue. It's amazing.
It's amazing.
Now, there we have it, our beautiful red pepper soup with the basil chili chicken. It's got that beautiful color that holds. So even when you freeze this and then thaw it, it still holds that beautiful bright red color. You've got the thyme in the background, that sort of citrus kick of the lemon juice up front. That's a good lunch.
And I've got someone asking about how the smell enhances your enjoyment of that food. I'm guessing from over here it smells wonderful.
It does. Oh, and actually I got a little piece of chili and that just warms my throat right now, so it's perfect. But that's part of the enjoyment of cooking, is the beautiful fragrances. I talked about how just getting an onion cooking makes the kitchen smell welcoming and homing, just homey and inviting. So using fresh herbs is an easy way to add aroma, to add color, to add flavor. And it doesn't have to take a long time. As I mentioned, this soup only takes 20 minutes. So while you get the ingredients chopped, you make the soup. While the soup is simmering, you get your side salad or your sporting dishes, your other dish ready. So you don't have to spend more time in the kitchen simply because you're trying to pare back on salt. You just have to make some deliberate choices. And I'm one of those nerds that goes into the grocery store with my shopping list so that I don't forget anything. Because that's the biggest frustration. You go to reach for something and it's not there, and then it changes your whole meal plan.
A question to make things easier through a busy work week with your cooking tips.
Definitely the make and freeze is a big tip. So if you're making batches of anything that you can then break down, especially if you have to take lunches to work and be aware of a renal diet, to make things that can be easily reheated is key. And so, yes, doing the prep when you have the time, which means weekends, don't leave it till the end of the week. But I think a big tip in making the prep stage more enjoyable, this sounds silly and maybe unrelated, sharp knives do so much. I realized my mom was frustrated with cooking a bit, because when I went into the kitchen, I realized she wasn't even enjoying chopping an onion because her kitchen knife was as dull as a butter knife. When you're not enjoying the process because you don't have sharp tools, you realize, it just becomes a bit of a pain. So getting your knives sharpened, and it's a myth that you shouldn't take your knives to a knife sharpener to be sharpened. That's their job.
Somebody's asking about using MSG instead of salt. As a dietitian, I don't recommend that because it is still sodium.
Good to know. And that sneaks up. Actually, would you mind, June, for my benefit as much as our entire group, and I'm so grateful to have you asking these great questions, are there other names of salt and salt-related products we need to be aware of when we're looking at labels of prepared goods?
That's a good question. And I think, looking for that word sodium, you will sometimes see salt, but it's added in other with other ingredients like sodium phosphate, sodium, any word, the monosodium glutamate, anything like that is a clue that there's sodium in there. So you do want to watch for that, as well as super salty ingredients. So things like soy sauce or fish sauce or anything that is a very concentrated flavor. You want to use those sorts of things extremely sparingly. And baking powder baking powder and baking soda are both sodium based. And I don't know if, as a pastry chef, Anna, I shouldn't say this, but usually I will suggest to my patients, if you're going to bake, the baking powder and the baking soda offer enough salt that you wouldn't need necessarily to add extra, because a lot of recipes, you make a dozen muffins, you add a teaspoon of salt, that's adding an extra 200 milligrams of sodium per muffin, and there's already going to be some in there from the leavening agents as well.
You know what, that brings up a very good point, June. Salt in baking is there for the same reason it is in cooking. It's to season and to heighten flavors. You can pull salt out of your baking 100% without compromising the chemical makeup of the recipe. Nothing will change in the recipe at all. So I highly recommend, if you're on a renal or sodium restricted diet, just pull the salt right out. The only place that it makes a difference, in terms of taste a little bit, but you've already learned how you can replace flavor in other ways, is with yeast breads, because the reaction, salt tempers or slows the fermentation of yeast. So if you're making a yeast bread, if you're into sourdough, things like that, it slows the fermentation that allows the yeast to develop flavor. If you don't add the salt, you'll find your yeast bread rises a lot faster. That said, sourdough is a great way to make a flavorful bread without adding salt, because you've got the sourness in there, that fermentation, to give it flavor. You just will have to play with your recipes, because where a bread dough with salt added might proof for 2 hours on the counter, it might be ready to go in an hour, simply because there's no salt added. And then you can add your rosemary. You could add a little paprika. Grains like rye add a full, robust flavor. Buckwheat, to your breads and your baking. But in any other baking, and I even learned through the Kidney Foundation, because I did a holiday recipe for a steamed cranberry orange Christmas pudding, a nice little individual dessert, that to pull out the baking powder, I replaced it with baking soda, but a third of the amount of soda. But then you add a bit of cream of tartar, which is acidity in powder form. So that causes the baking soda to activate and behave like baking powder, but you've really reduced those volumes. So no baking powder whatsoever, and then half the amount of baking soda.
And what that also does is takes out some of the phosphate. So most kidney patients want to avoid having too much added phosphate, and that is in baking powder. And I just want to make sure everybody knows that Anna has written a post on seasoning without salt on the Kidney Community Kitchen. So you can check out the website and read her blog post. And I believe the link is in the chat. So that is also a great resource. And if you were trying to madly write everything down in this session, you'll be able to refer back to her blog post.
And the full recipe too, for the red pepper soup.
Yes.
Excellent. We're almost at our time. I'd love to know if there are any last minute questions. This has been a really dynamic conversation. I've learned a lot from you, June. So I'm grateful to have had this time with everyone.
Well, and I've learned a lot too, and I'm excited to go home and try this recipe. Adding the rice to that is such a fantastic piece of advice. I sometimes find roasted red pepper soups a little bit thin, but this looks fantastic. So in the Q&A, there are lots of, thank yous. And one last question here, or two last questions. Somebody's commenting that they were taught that chocolate dessert always needs salt, And so how can you get around that? And then what your favorite spring produce is. We'd like to hear that too.
Well, to answer the chocolate question, we've become accustomed to adding salt and in sort of how we eat chocolate. Chocolate has a bitterness to it. And so just the same way, you know how popular salted caramel is, it's because the salt tempers the taste of the bitterness from burnt sugar in caramel and the bitterness of the cocoa in chocolate. So that's why they're commonly associated together. But technically, in the preparation of a chocolate dessert, the salt doesn't do anything. It is purely for taste. So this is where I would invite, we've got, surprisingly, everyone talks about orange and chocolate as a commentation. Just a couple of gratings of lemon zest in your chocolate dessert will do that rounding out thing that will balance your flavors and kind of temper the bitterness a bit. So that was a fantastic question. And now I've forgotten what the second question was.
Your favorite spring produce.
Oh, my favorite string herbs or produce?
That's produce.
Produce. When asparagus season hits, I just go bananas. I love living here in Southern Ontario. We grow local asparagus, and I don't, now and again I'll buy it as a treat in winter and always be disappointed. But when you get that first pick of asparagus and it's so fresh that it's dewy at the bottom and you blanch it, it honestly blanches in 30 seconds. Oh, it's so good. And then I'll eat it every day for the entire asparagus season that I'm so sick of it. I don't want to see it again for another year. So at this point, I'm ready for asparagus.
Okay, one other question I missed, how to find a renal dietitian. So all kidney clinics in Canada should have a kidney dietitian that you can ask for a referral to. So talk to your kidney health team, or Dietitians of Canada has a Find a Dietitian feature on it. That's dietitians.ca. And I think that is, another last quick question on herbal teas, that teas that won't hurt you. I'm not sure, like a chamomile tea is fine, a mint tea, black tea. I think those are the question there is herbal teas that are like kidney tea or tonic type things, but regular teas, like green tea, blueberry tea, that sort of thing is fine. Yeah.
And if I may, from a cook's perspective, tea is a fantastic flavoring ingredient.
That's a great point.
I mean, it's a flavored liquid. It's infused, and so you've added, and there's so many different ones you can buy. So long as they're approved for a renal diet, there's another great flavor builder you can use without adding salt.
Yes. Thank you. And I think I don't see any other questions that I have missed. Lots of people saying thank you. So that was just amazing, Anna. Thank you so much. Thanks for everyone that came. And then, I think, Carrie, is there anything that I have missed here?
Yeah, thanks, June. I just want to say a big thank you to both of you for leading this really wonderful cooking demonstration. I'm looking forward to trying this recipe myself and adding it to my soup repertoire. It's going to be really exciting. And I think we learned a lot of tips about flavors and substitutions as well. So I think what a dynamic discussion, and thank you both. Also want to thank everyone who joined the session. So I'll point you all to the Kidney Community Kitchen website, which you've heard a lot about today. There are a lot of kidney-friendly recipes on there. There's a lot of information about healthy kidney diets. So I encourage you to visit.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be with you and spend this last hour preparing the delicious recipe. And if I may say, well timed, because now my lunch is ready. Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.